Just a small note before I think we let the guests in. In case in the middle of the panel I drop off the call, it's because my laptop might have some technical problems. I will reconnect within a minute. So if anything happens, Timuri Seb will be managing and moderating while I am away. Hopefully that will not happen, but it's good to always be prepared.
Raim said you are in Canada now, no? Right now.
Yes, I'm in Toronto, yes.
Okay.
We'll start in maybe 1 or 2 minutes, just for a few colleagues to join. Okay, Raim, so I think we should begin, and people have started joining. So, dear colleagues, dear friends, dear participants, and members of this panel, very warm welcome to today's webinar. My name is Raib Timuri, and I am a senior fellow at the Center for Dialogue and Progress, Geneva. And I welcome you on behalf of CDP-G, and thank you for giving your time to participate and be part of this webinar. 2 years after the military takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban, we still feel the impact of the failure of the Doha process. The Doha process was meant to bring peace in Afghanistan. However, today we are in a situation that the state institutions are no longer in existence. The world does not recognize a government in Afghanistan, and the country is experiencing a humanitarian catastrophe, and a systematic violation of human rights is in place in the country. The women are particularly the victim of these systematic discriminatory regime, as they are completely driven out of all political, social, and economic activities and nearly all their fundamental rights have reversed. Last year, CDP-G had the honor of organizing 2 webinars in which a total of 15 speakers analyzed the reasons for failure of the Doha process and its impact on the future of national dialogue and peace in Afghanistan and on other conflicts around the world. Part of the webinars were members of the negotiation team of the Republic, former Western ambassadors in Afghanistan, experts on peace building, and members of academia and women activists who participated in events in Geneva at the time. CDP-G has prepared the outcome of these discussions as part of a report and has the honor to announce that the report is available on the website of CDP-G right now. Since the webinars were held under the Chatham House rules, the report does not make attributions to specific speakers. However, a list of speakers is attached to the report. We hope that this report provides a better picture of what happened in Doha and why the process failed. I believe there are important observations made by the speakers during the webinars and which are reflected in the report. For example, the speakers said that nearly all parties had miscalculated the situation, and that miscalculation resulted in great surprises that we have seen at the time of the collapse. It was also mentioned nearly by all speakers that the Doha Agreement between the Taliban and the US government was the key trigger in tarnishing the image of the Republic and creating the belief that the Taliban will come to power, and hence the surprising collapse of the provinces and the institutions. I do not want to go through all key points of the report. The report is available online, and you can go download it and review the details of the report. And with this, I'm inviting my friend and colleague, Shuaib Rahim, who will moderate today's session. I also welcome our speakers and thank them for taking their time to be part of this panel. Shuaib Rahim is an associate professor of practice at the American University of Afghanistan. He was a senior public official involved in the Doha peace negotiations, and prior to that served on the national cabinet as acting mayor of Kabul. He is a non-resident research scholar at the New School, a Fulbright scholar, and a graduate of Duke University. Rahim Seb, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Timouri Seb. Esteemed guests, panelists, welcome to today's conversation and discussion hosted by the Center for Dialogue and Progress, Geneva. Today's panel discussion will be is titled Afghanistan 2 Years On, Doha Peace Talks, State Collapse and its Implications on Global Peace Building. We have a panel of heavyweights, if I may, and it's an honor to have all of the panelists with us. I will do a quick round of introductions, and then we will start with the first round of questions to the audience. Please feel free to share your questions in the question box and the chat box there, and I will introduce the questions after the first round, and we're going to try to keep it as a lively back and forth, hopefully. The intention is to make sure that we try to cover topics and questions which have not been discussed as much from a newer perspective. So a quick introduction of our panelists. We have with us Mirwais Balkhi, who is a fellow at the Wilson Center currently based in Washington, D.C., where his research focus are regional studies, Middle Eastern studies, foreign policy, and nation-state building, international theory, and international security. He's also a faculty member at Georgetown University, Qatar. He holds a PhD in international relations with a specialization in West Asian studies from Jawaharlal Nehru University, India. He's an established author and an academic, and also the former Minister of Education of Afghanistan. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Balkhi today. We also have with us Mr. Jean-Paul Mogheraniza. He's a Senior Director of Partnership, Program Development and Innovation at Interpeace, based in Geneva. Jean-Paul, a native of Rwanda, has been educated at the National University of Rwanda and Bachelor's of Law, and University of Quebec, Master's in Public Administration, and has worked over a span of 18 years in public service, governance, peace building, and education in the Africa, Great Lakes, West Africa, and Europe. And we're honored to have him with us today to share his insights and perspectives in our conversation. Next, we have Habiba Sarabi, who's known to all of us. She was a member of the Republic of Afghanistan's negotiation team, sitting across the table from the Taliban in Doha. She's also the former governor and the first female governor of Afghanistan, former governor of Bamyan, and she was also the Minister of Women's Affairs and served on the National Cabinet. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Sarabi Saib, today. And last but not least, we have Steve Brookings, who's currently a senior advisor at European Institute for Peace. He has worked in Afghanistan and on Afghanistan over 2 decades, and is very closely familiar with issues in Afghanistan. He served as acting deputy SRSG UNAMA, and is someone whose insights and perspectives we've always greatly benefited from. And it's a pleasure to have you with us today as well, Steve. So that's for the round of introductions. Let us begin with Mr. Mirwais Balkhi. I'd like to start off asking you that after 20 years, after 20 years of investing in a democratic and accountable system of governance focused on service delivery, which was the intention, the Republic collapsed. And we now have a minimally functioning set of institutions which do not hold themselves accountable to the people, nor are democratic in any way. Could you speak to the causes behind this fragility? Do you think it was because the system design over the past 20 years was too rigid and centralized, or do you think that the reforms were too ambitious for Afghanistan?
Well, thank you very much, Shuaib, and thanks for CDP Geneva for this timely webinar that we came together to talk about issues in Afghanistan. First of all, let me say that though Afghanistan has been taken for granted nowadays as a crucial topic in international politics, but I believe that nowadays we are witnessing some of the unconventional in the international politics from Afghanistan that may put a huge weight to the international new normals based on different exceptional modalities we're witnessing. For example, an ungoverned space that we have for the first time in a country where we do not have any bureaucratic administration to deliver any kind of services to the people. And above all, the independent democratic states are somehow trying to contact with terrorist groups who are even now currently on the blacklist, and many more yet to come, unfortunately. So for the question, when we talk about the fragility and collapse in Afghanistan, we may have sets of minor and major factors to discuss and to see what have been there as the reasons behind the collapse that we have seen or witnessed 2 years back. But I believe that we have to always see the main cause, the major cause, in which I believe that the centralized design of the governance, or the ambitious reforms that you were talking, are not the main cause, I believe, because maybe in an in-conflict situation like Afghanistan, we did not uh, uh, turn from in-conflict situation to a post-conflict situation, except for 2-3 years in the beginning, which was potentially Afghanistan was in crisis. Maybe we failed to see those parts at that time. Maybe a centralized design of governance was necessary for Afghanistan to fight against an ideological, radically people who do not believe for any barriers and boundaries that we are talking about Afghanistan's gaps. Or, for example, the reforms also, I have not seen any ambitious or unconventional or even not homogeneous reforms that we set in Afghanistan in the post Bonn Agreement or post 2001, because it was at the same time parallelly very conservative designs that we set for Afghanistan. Even the reconstruction of Afghanistan was not that to kind of change or transform the bad customs of Afghanistan, which, for example, set against the girls' education even then during the 20 years. For me, Shoaib, the main cause of the collapse in Afghanistan is the wrong process of nation building in the post 2001 Afghanistan in the past 20 years, because Afghanistan was totally collapsed even before 2001, and we had a status of not homogeneous or national ideas, national symbols, national consensus in Afghanistan as a nation state, or even as a nation inside Afghanistan, which was potentially bringing various gaps among the people of Afghanistan. But we were kind of busy in our own administrative activities or state apparatus, kind of to show state structure for international community, or kind of justifying ourselves for that projects in the country. So that is why in the post 2001, what was necessary and vital for Afghanistan was a nation building process. That was kind of a stereotype process that we have projected in Afghanistan, but that was not, again, I say, designed for Afghanistan. That is why the wrong process that we have taken lead to the total collapse of a country and nation. For example, if I may go little in details, some of the parameters of this failed nation state or nation building process in the country, what I saw and what I have mentioned also in different books and articles back then in Afghanistan before the total collapse. For example, the nation building in Afghanistan never changed from a project to process. It was all about the project in different parameters and different aspects and sections of the society. For example, taking the governance, taking the security issues, taking the identity issues in the country. We needed a process to go on different aspects, but that was all small segments of the projects, so that we had a time-bound projects, and we had to start from somewhere and finish in somewhere else. And then it was all in different individual islands which did not incorporate with each other as a totality. So that is one biggest problem that we had. That is why even if the nation building process was American nation building modality that we had, and major literature is available on that, but the focus or the weight was on fighting against terrorism in Afghanistan. So that is why when you are fighting terrorism in a country, in the aftermath of your victory, you have to resettle some things on that country. So that resettlement was designed in a way that in a country there was all the capacities, all the potentials, and they needed to project some of the parameters of nation building, and then everything was all set, which was not the case in Afghanistan, as the case was somehow comparatively in Iraq, for example, or even historically in Germany, in Korea, in Japan, in many other countries, which was not the case in the country. Second, Shuaib, it was a top-down process. It was not a bottom-up process, because the people of Afghanistan in the urban areas, the people of Afghanistan in the rural areas, especially those who are bound to customs, or those who are bound with many other challenges at the bottom, they were not feeling a change, a transformation in majority. Yeah, minority was there, that was a fact, but not in majority. At the same time, it was more a military type nation building in Afghanistan, not a social or emotional nation building designed for the country. So that is why bulk of the supports, the budget, all these went into the security of Afghanistan. I was in the Ministry of Education. We had the total education sector, higher education, school education, madrasa education, religious education, literacy program, or technical vocational trainings, all had 8% of the total budget of the country. A country which needed whole expectations from the young generation and from the families, for example, or to invest a quality education, or for example to give access to education to girls in a traditional society of, like, majority of rural areas. The 8% out of that, maybe 5% of that was going to for my ministry, and it was too difficult to even survive as an educational administration than to go to quality education or give access to education. So that is why no reforms could be implemented on education sector, like that in society, like that in culture, like that in market, and especially the priorities for markets of Afghanistan for all young generation who consist the majority of the country. And
I'll intervene there,
just
and yeah, please go ahead.
Just one point, Shuaib, which is also a major cause for the failure, and that is the uncommitted diaspora leadership who were projected to Afghanistan to lead the nation state building process, which could not, come success in the country. So for me, the major causes a failed nation building process in the country.
Thank you, Balkisa. You raised some very interesting points, which are not discussed as much. And perhaps in the second round of questioning, I'll build on how you think the process of nation building is going now. Do you think we have the foundations now to form or to strengthen the notion of a nation under Taliban rule? So I'd like to come back to that in the second round of questioning, but thank you very much for that intervention. I'll turn to you now, Jean-Paul, and I'll build on Mirwais Balkhi's comment on the new normal with the Taliban, how the international community is setting new precedents, engaging with a blacklisted entity in where there's a gap of legitimacy and democratic institutions are engaging. That kind of sets us up well for your intervention. And the question I'd like to pose to you is, given the success of the Taliban in overthrowing the government of Afghanistan and essentially surviving NATO, they are now seen as an inspiration for many ideological militants across the world. Can you speak to this effect? Do you think that has had that effect? And provide some context on the lessons other extremist groups have drawn from the Taliban experience, and how it may have affected peace-building efforts in those contexts.
Thank you, Shaib, and thank you for the CDP-G to invite me. Very exciting conversation. That question is a PhD one. It's a very complex question. It has various ramifications. But you are absolutely right. No one would have ever imagined that after 20 years, the Taliban will win. If you see the rapport de force that was there, it was astonishing. That's how quickly it went. And indeed, it had implication beyond Afghanistan, particularly in Africa, in the mental status of people, from young people to terrorists to normal citizens. People should remember that the first terrorist group that gave congratulations to Taliban is Al-Shabaab. They were congratulating Taliban for having defeated the West in general. However, that's not the point. In the overall African mindset, from that moment, the idea that there is a superpower capable of restoring peace and stability in the world has been undermined forever. From the political leaders to opposition to terrorist group to young people. Because if you can spend all the money, all the military, all everything, and then at the end, you arrive to the result that we have, that belief of one guardian of the international community is gone. And it is reflected in the current situation in Africa. Number two, the parallel again, the intervention of US and its ally in Libya have again created a belief that the international community intervention is not always a good thing. It always exacerbates situations, and it needs to be taken with caution in the big number of Africans. I work in the field. Every time you talk, for example, about the notion of human rights, every single time we have what young people dialogue club in various countries in Africa, the question that comes is, have the US paid on what they did in Afghanistan? Have they paid on what they did in Libya? What are you talking about? There is no human right. There is human right for the strongest. The question for young people, we have dialogue club from young people from 10 to up to 35. And it's fascinating when you see how the failure of international community there in other spaces has undermined the belief of the value of UN and the militarism in globally. And the notion of nation building, the experience from Afghanistan and in other African countries shows that there is no nation building that is driven externally that can be successful. It doesn't work like that. When you arrive to the point where you need to rebuild the nation, let me use the terminology of my predecessor. You need a process. It's something you can fix like this. You need a process, and it requires time. And time to do what? To not make sure that no one is left behind, to negotiate the social fabric that actually makes the nation building possible, to renegotiate the social contract. Most of the time, the international community focus on military intervention, on heavy machinery to be deployed. For example, the whole Sahel issue now, you can mirror it in the Afghanistan problem. You go to Mali, you see the MINISMA, how much money they have spent over the years. And around, Mali is a country with high-level people that are poor, that lack basic infrastructure. And they can see that around near in Bamako, people are living in luxury. So what maybe the missing point was, can we listen to these people? Because the space there is a space there that has been left for long to extremists, so that we can listen to these people and bring them to the whole stabilization agenda, so that it doesn't become MINISMA stabilization. The stabilization was for who? Today, the whole problem in Sahel is because there is disconnect between the elite, and sometimes backed by West, that has been there. The disconnect has been there for long, that people has managed their poverty quietly. And now there is someone called terrorists who use religious lenses, who come and do basic services, health, agriculture, and education, basically taking the role of the state. So to be able to undo the situation, you need to go back to talk to people and involve them in the thinking and do minimum basic poverty reduction services. And it takes time. The process of, I can go on DRC. The MONUSCO currently has spent billions of dollars over 20 years. But what has it produced? We still have in the East 78 armed group and very poor people. If some of that money would have been invested in basic infrastructure, in a serious state building dialogue, maybe the result will be different. The result would be the disaster that we have now. So lessons as for Afghanistan, the same mistake are being done in Africa. I do believe that the whole notion of materialism, engaging in conflict, need rethinking, need to be humble. Of course, I'm not naive. All of this is driven by some more external factor like geostrategy that we can't control. It's still okay, but can we, at least for the value of saving money and time, really be humble and go back and say to the drawing table and say, what have we done that has not worked, that we need to do, even if we need to still protect our interests, but do things differently? Because the price of not doing it is catastrophic. Even the immigration that Europe is facing now is a result of that system. You can't fight immigration and the young people of Africa that are dying in hundreds in Mediterranean if you don't change the whole process notion of aid, peace building, and dynamics. What is happening in Niger today, it's very bizarre that people are from the north to the south are actually disconnected from the international community that is saying we don't like the coup. But the people in Niger say we want the coup. And the people in the Sahel, as Interpeace, we are present in this country, and I can tell you that we are finding a bizarre tendency of civil society that are obliged to back the coup, because the alternative is what? Because what the liberal democracy and election has not produced the result that people wanted. Again, probably instead of mimicking the liberal democracy that is not from within, that is negotiated, again, we need to go back again to the fundamentals of state building, negotiated social contract.
Can I, Jean-Paul, can I intervene quickly there? I think there's a very, very interesting notions, and the idea that the confidence in international institutions and these established peace building processes, the confidence in them has been undermined. We in Afghanistan, we sense this firsthand, but the fact that it has had the same effect in the African context and the conflicts that you've mentioned is very fascinating. I'd like to come back perhaps in the second round of questioning, building on a consistent notion that you've mentioned and also that Balkhiseb mentioned, which is, what about the new normal, the ongoing engagement of the international community with a blacklisted de facto authority? How has this set new aspirations for militant groups across the world, saying, look, if you are violent enough, if you are able to survive militarily and control territory, the world has no choice but to engage you. And the rest is all, as you said, the rest is all, that nobody takes it seriously. Nobody takes human rights seriously. These values are just flaunted whenever necessary. So I'd like to come back to that discussion in the second round of questioning. But thank you very much for that very, very insightful, for sharing your insightful thoughts. I'd like to shift now to Sarabiseb. I'm hoping that you are with us. I'm not able to see your video.
Yes, Shaib, I am here, but
okay.
I don't know why again.
The video is not working. No problem. So we hear you loud and clear. So so you have, Sarabiseb, you have in-depth experience, of course, in public service, as well as rights advocacy, and you represented the Republic and the government side of Afghanistan in the Doha negotiations across the Taliban. The question that's there in many people's minds who keep on thinking about what happened or what didn't happen in Doha is that there was a deadlock, and there was no progress, and nobody was the process was not moving forward, and it became apparent and obvious very quickly that the Taliban are not serious about these negotiations because the war was very aggressively going on the ground. So the question in many people's minds, and something that it'd be great if you can speak to, is that why did the negotiation team not walk away from the table, not walk away from Doha? Now that we've seen everything unravel, do you think that if the negotiating team walked away because of the Taliban's lack of seriousness in the peace talks and in negotiation, could we have created some space and sent a message to the security forces and to the country that things are not the way they seem, and essentially have a different outcome because of a clear position of walking away? Do you think that would have been possible, and why did it not happen?
Thank you very much, Rahim Saib, and thank you for CDP Geneva to organizing this webinar. Happy to be a part of the panelists. Rahim Saib, you are also a part of the team. At the beginning, let me to start that at the beginning of the peace talk, there was a big hope from international side and also from people in Afghanistan, because Afghan people were suffered for a long time. Still, they are suffering. However, Taliban claimed that they brought security, but there is not security, and security should be I mean, should have a clear definition. So because of that, the suffer that our people had, they were thirst for peace, and there was a huge hope for among the people for peace. We started the negotiation, and also from international community side, there was a hope, and many countries had the representative in Doha. Some of the country, for example, Germany, addition to the special envoy, there was a technical team that they were training. I mean, they were expert of technical team that they were expert for peace building and peace negotiation. And from Norway, a special envoy, and also from UNAMA, from US, the team were there, and they called peace support team. So the first period, or the first part of the negotiation, the contact group had a little bit regular meeting. But even for the first period, which took us 3 months, at the middle of the first period, also we faced with the deadlock. The second period, which was started after in January 2001, so the Taliban didn't show interest to come for talks. So they had their own business, their own issue in Doha. At the same time, we, the Republican team, we had the peace talk was our mission. We were there to accomplish our mission. But the Taliban side, they had their home, they had their family, they had their business. Whenever they want to come, I mean, mostly after the evening prayer, they were ready to come for peace. So that time also we faced with deadlock. So during the negotiation, the very important issue for them was this peace agreement. Let me to explain that for the public. The peace agreement between US and Taliban is still the public are confused with that. Sometimes they are mixing the negotiation. For example, they think that the Republican team went there and signed some agreement with Taliban, which is totally wrong. We didn't sign any agreement with Taliban, and for the second period, at least we came for some agenda to discuss about that, or agree about agenda to discuss about that. That after that collapse happened. So this agreement between the Taliban and the United States, that gave the Taliban a kind of upper hand. During the negotiation, they were saying that we defeated the superpower in NATO. So it was a kind of pride for them that they defeated a superpower US and NATO. So that's why they were not willing to come to the table to talk with Republican team. So that's why most of the time, and at least 3 times we faced with deadlock, but with the facilitation of the support group, and also especially Qatari, the deadlock removed, and we started again for to talk. And there is the question why we didn't walk out from deadlock. Of course, during the deadlock, so we were very disappointed. We wanted to walk out from the talk, but from the support group, we were, I mean, not to pressurize, but at least their advice was that if we can walk away, there will be, I mean, all the accusation come to the Republican team. So because from the other side, we recognize, the team recognize that if we walk away, so there will be a kind of legitimacy for Taliban. Taliban was looking for legitimacy during the peace talk in Doha. Their
Do
big
you still think that,
achievement.
I'm sorry to intervene, but do you still think that way? I know at that time, the Republic team and the Taliban team was afraid that if they walk out, they will be blamed for failure. Do you still agree, or do you think maybe we should have, the Republic side should have actually walked away? Now that you saw what happened,
no, if we walked away, so it was actually it was a kind of legitimacy that we could give it to Taliban. Taliban was looking for legitimacy from Doha talk, because they had their agreement with the US, and so that's why you know that a part of or an item to that agreement was that the intra-Afghan negotiation. So if that one we could walk away, so in this case we could give the legitimacy to Taliban. That's why we stayed, and we wanted to continue for negotiation.
So you think it was the right decision to stay in Doha, even though the Taliban were not seriously negotiating a ceasefire or any other agenda?
Yeah, they didn't, but at the end, of course, from the other side, they were they had, I mean, every day military-wise, they had some achievement in the inside Afghanistan, but so there was no any other choice. If we could, of course, if they didn't come, or if they didn't achieve military-wise, of course, the negotiation could come in a better result.
I guess, Rabisib, the question that I have in my mind, and many people have in their minds, I'm sure, is, could we have had a different outcome in Doha? Could we have done things differently to force the hand of the Taliban? The Taliban's position was clear. They had signed the deal with the Americans. They had a withdrawal commitment. They were pushing militarily on the ground. And, you know, the Taliban are, you know, they have their strategy and their position. But could we have done anything differently? Like, I'm not sure now after 2 years, has anything crossed your mind? Do you think we could have, or we were stuck? Or do you think we were stuck and this was the only failure of the process was the only outcome?
If there was more time, we could have done better. For example, on the US Taliban agreement, they spent 18 months for only 4 items. But we were, we came to discuss, or we agreed to discuss on the main agenda. But unfortunately, the collapse and military, military capture, damage the peace talk. If we had time, if we had, if the military-wise they didn't could get more power, so of course the peace talk outcome could be better.
Thank you very much, Rabisib. Very, very insightful. I mean, everybody talks about the Doha process, the confusion that society has between the Doha deal, which the US signed, and the negotiations that the Republican Taliban had is obviously one that is there in the minds in general. But, you know, I think there'll be many analysis and questions asked for years to come about what could have been different. So I'll hopefully try to come back to the some of the experiences.
Let me, Shoaib John, if I may, another thing. I have to share this one else as well. If the Republic, if the president and the team wanted to have a plan B, it could be, the outcome could be better, because it was an idea that, I mean, both sides had a red line, and no one could, I mean, could go over the red line. From Republic side was that the idea was that the Taliban should join to the Republic, like Gulbuddin as Gulbuddin Hekmatyar did the same. No, the idea was like that, but Taliban was insisting on the pure Islamic regime. So it was the main, I mean, deadlock. So there was not any plan B for the Republic, how to deal with Taliban, how to come, I mean, give them, I mean, some, because the peace talk is a deal, giving and taking. So unfortunately, we didn't have the plan B for that.
Okay, that's a very important insight, and I'll try to come back to that in the second round of questioning, or what you think that plan B could have been possibly. But thank you very much, Sarawise, for your intervention. Steve, I'd like to now come to you, listening to what Sarawise and other panelists have shared. I mean, in all these conversations, you know, there's the shadow of the United Nations as the entity which oversees efforts to resolve conflicts, and you are somebody who has you know, very close familiarity with the inner workings of the UN and also Afghanistan. So I'd like to bring the conversation to how things have been in the past 2 years. Do you think that the current course of action that the UN entities like UNAMA and UNDP and others are taking will lead to any behavior change which is being taunted constantly? Or do you think there's a different approach that the UN could take? I just want to set that up, but feel free to steer the conversation elsewhere as well.
Thanks, Shoaib. I would just say on Dr. Sarabi's point, if you like, the question you asked Dr. Sarabi, you know, could the Republic have walked out? My take on that is quite clear. We saw the amount of pressure the Republic was put under after the Americans had signed their deal in February, how the Americans interpreted their agreement and the release of prisoners, you know, very much in the Taliban's favor, as in they wanted specific prisoners. And I think had the Republic team, you know, once they got to the negotiating table after months of pressure from the Americans, had they walked out, I think the Americans would have pulled their troops almost instantly. I think Trump would have just said, forget it, that's it, we're going. So I think, you know, pulling out of the talks would have meant, you know, Trump having the excuse just to say, right, forget it, we're all leaving now. And I mean, that was always, I know, you know, someone said to me, you know, Ambassador Khalilzad had a very difficult hand, which he played very badly. But, you know, he had this constant sword hanging over him that Trump could just pull out troops. So I think that is, you know, I don't think pulling the Republic team out.
I mean, since you raised this specific point, I mean, the Trump wildcard excuse, I think, has been overused. I mean, how many times are you going to blame the randomness of Trump policy for a very thought out strategy? The Doha strategy was very well thought out and worked in policy circles in DC. So, you know.
Yeah, but it was basically a surrender agreement, as Ambassador Ron Crocker once described it. It was just about getting out the American troops. And it was very interesting to see how quickly Ambassador Khalilzad went from tweeting about nothing is agreed till everything is agreed to saying basically, well, we've got our agreement, you know, we don't care about the rest. And I know from friends in State Department who were no fans necessarily of Trump or Khalilzad that, you know, there was genuine pressure and fear that the White House could, you know, make a rash move like he did with troops in Iraq and such like. And, you know, as it ended up, you know, they were able to prolong the decision for some time. And then it was Biden who finally made the decision. Anyway, back onto the UN. Yeah, so I mean, no, I can't see UNDP having achieved very much at all in their 20 years in Afghanistan. So I don't see UNDP as the way forward. I think you need to split the UN between their, if you like, political part, the UNAMA, the political mission, and the humanitarian agencies. So clearly there remains a need for the humanitarian agencies to be there providing humanitarian aid. And that is difficult because of the restrictions on women workers and such like. It's also difficult because the Taliban want to control that aid. So they are setting up NGOs. They're trying to get aid diverted through their NGOs. UNICEF had to pull out of most of the education field because the Taliban wanted, education completely under their control. I think on the development side, when it comes back to what Balkhi Saib and Jean-Paul said, which is, the development side has never worked properly, if you like. It's been replacing governments around the world. UNDP, when I worked for them, I thought the job was to make projects and hand over things to the government. But, many people in UNDP seem to think that these projects were just designed to go on as long as possible so they could keep their nice, well-paid jobs. There's a reason that lots of the funding, the humanitarian fund for Afghanistan for this year is woefully undersubscribed by donors. And it's partly because the UN constantly over-pitches and over-dramatizes situations. For 2 winters, we were told millions of Afghan kids would starve. Well, they didn't. And the funds were never fully funded. So people, I think, are fed up with the Taliban's approach to things and with the UN's approach to things. You give the UN a lot of money and sometimes they use them to buy new armored vehicles or such like. That's not, what donors want to see done. And I think a greater responsibility is falling on the region to help. And maybe it should do. The region is the place that has the greatest threat from state collapse and outflow of refugees and such like. So countries of the region, China, Pakistan, Iran, and others don't give money through the UN. So that's another reason that that money is not sort of flowing into the UN, because the region tends to give bilaterally, which is obviously their choice. So I think we need to keep the humanitarian support going, but try to monitor where the funding is going. It's taxpayers' money from other countries. Some of them are fed up with Afghanistan. The Biden administration, as you said earlier, basically seems to be doing as much as it can to, keep the item off the agenda at all before the next elections. And the same applies to some other Western countries. So, immediate life-saving support may be forthcoming, but you're not going to see much in the terms of development and building institutions. And the Taliban have not made it easy. The way they've restricted people, contacts, the way they're basically holding hostages from various Western nations at the moment. There's Americans and British who are prisoners of the General Directorate of Intelligence, but there's no sign of a trial or anything. They're being used as bargaining chips. So that's what you would call hostages under any normal circumstances.
That's always, you always have individuals and that's a separate track. You can't use that to justify $20 million a day infusion. You can. You can say, if you want a genuine working relationship with us, you hand over our nationals who you've imprisoned wrongfully, and then we will start talking about providing some aid. You can very easily, governments can very easily have that. I said, this you can say, but saying that we cannot stop engagement because they hold a few prisoners of ours, because that's what it seems to be. Like what the grounds on which, and I want to build on the regional argument you just made, the grounds upon which the US essentially is driving engagement with the Taliban is, they're bad people, but maybe they can be our bad guys. Maybe they can align ourselves with our incentives regionally. And I'm curious, because there seems to be a competition for aligning the Taliban with either regional interests and U.S. interests, and those two are not one and the same. Who can you weaponize the Taliban against each other? So how willing do you think the UN is to push a regional kind of solution for any sort of constructive engagement?
Well, as you know, there's a special coordinator appointed by the Security Council, who's a Turkish envoy. He's in Kabul at the moment. He's been talking. He's been going around the region. He's been trying to find out what the appetite is. And I think the problem remains that there's not a lot of appetite for disengagement. and it's not the UN. The UN's task is to be engaged. Turkey is obviously a regional player and would like to see engagement. So I'm sure that the report will recommend continued engagement with the Taliban. I think American engagement seems to be much more trying to deal with keeping it off the agenda and the counterterrorism agenda that they claim to have from the Doha Agreement still against Islamic State and such like. Although, as the UN report pointed out, there's plenty of Al-Qaeda and other groups, and as Pakistan is finding out, the Pakistani Taliban seems to be quite active. So I do think it's in the region's best interests to try to come together and work on peace in Afghanistan. They are hampered by having other priorities. Pakistan's obviously a bit of a political mess at the moment, China's economy, Russia, Ukraine. So there's lots of other issues around, which is preventing the region perhaps getting together. But they have been, I think, remarkably solid and consistent in saying, we need better women's rights, we need a more inclusive government, and no one is rushing to recognize the Taliban. So I think that's a positive, that the region is more engaged. I think the UN, the problem with the UN always, and Africa, all around the world, it's, we tried to do a peace deal back in 2015, or peace talks between the two Stanaxi's in China. And we approached the Chinese and they agreed to do it. And the Taliban and Republic already said they were prepared to do it. And then we were summoned to GHQ in Islamabad by then General Raheel Sharif, who said, how dare you try and do something without involving us? The UN only has the power given to it by member states, and we're not prepared to go along with this. Now, they did their own meeting in Urumqi, which turned into the Murray process. But I think the fact is there's no real consistency or agreement on how to approach the Taliban at the moment, amongst the Security Council or amongst the region. And therefore,
Steve, can I just build on that a little bit? Because based on what Jean-Paul mentioned and based on what Balkhiseb also alluded to, this issue of recognition, the Taliban are, a militant group who are de facto running the country. So, people are talking about, they will have the incentive to change their behavior, at least gradually, slowly, if we incentivize them with recognition. But recognition to the Taliban and to other militant groups in Africa and elsewhere means something very different than an independent democratic state. If the money is coming, that is good enough. What else do you need for recognition? Like, you don't need states and letterheads and flags. They can live without that. So is this a new kind of world we're entering where, militants take over a country, they do coups, and people say, we're not going to recognize you, but we're going to send you money, but we're going to send you aid, but we're going to help you with your service, but we're going to help you with all these other things. And they were like, well, that works for us. We don't really care about anything else. So do you think that's kind of becoming the new normal?
Yeah, I think militant groups, when they're fighting, want some form of recognition, sitting equally at the table or whatever. But of course, the Taliban have gone beyond that. They've got what they want, which is control of the country. I never saw any sign that they were prepared to compromise their ideological principles, if you like, in exchange for anything. Certainly not. They wouldn't, exchange their genuine version of Islam for money. They'd rather just not have the money. So I think that I think that the Taliban are not going to, bend over backwards to be helpful in exchange for recognition. But withholding recognition and keeping sanctions on and making life more difficult for them keeps a certain amount of pressure on. But I think that's why the pressure has to come from the people most capable of doing it, which is the region economically and such like.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Steve. For the audience, we're going to do a very quick second round of questioning to our panelists, but feel free to share your questions in the Q&A, and I will share them as I receive them. I know there's a question there, which I will introduce after I share a few more questions to our panelists. Sharing that, feel free to write in the Q&A box. Balkhiseb, you've heard the conversation. You've heard the conversation so far. I want to come back to the point that you mentioned, which was nation building and how we got it wrong in the past 20 years, because we didn't have a people who believed in common things, and we had to approach things differently, and we couldn't, and it was a house of cards which fell, essentially. So how do you see it now? Do you think that the Taliban, because they have this position of being very patriotic, they have a very religious banner, a religious narrative, but also of being protectors of the land against occupation. So there is a narrative of patriotism that the Taliban are claiming. How do you see the process of nation building going on currently? Is it existent at all? Do people care about it? Is it as bad as people outside claim that it's setting people apart, or is there some genuine discussion for people to say, look, we can't expect the outside international community to do this for us. We have to come to terms one way or the other. So I think I'd love to hear your comments on how the nation building process is going on right now.
Let me take from your last sentence, Shuaib. I believe that no nation building process is going on in Afghanistan. It is rather a nation devastating process. You see, in the past 2 years, you have a group in Afghanistan who is ruling the people of Afghanistan based on certain seats of decrees, which is completely gender apartheid, ethnic apartheid, religious apartheid. And in this situation, if you had the least intention from the Taliban as a ruling group nowadays in Afghanistan to govern the country, you could see at least a single paper of the design of the government on Afghanistan, or, for example, what they want on Afghanistan, what will be the future of Afghanistan, or any other paper except some of the decrees. And these decrees are also not for revamping the gaps, not for making or reconstructions. It is all about how to implement those policies who have failed to implement during 90s. All the decrees are on how to implement their own desires. So that is why on the market, on the social emotions, on, for example, administration, on services delivery, on health, anything, you do not have a single decree to formulate something for that betterment. So what I believe is that the current process which is going on in Afghanistan is a kind of homogenization, which is the most failed modality of the nation building, where the world experienced after Second World War in across the globe, based on socialism, based on different nationalism, based on different ideologic modalities that they had. In a country, you have huge diverse that you have. So that is why it is, I believe, the climax of a misunderstanding in Afghanistan, which we are repeating at least in the half-century conflict that we have in Afghanistan, because we are in a mode of ethnic hegemony in Afghanistan. I mean, almost everyone, because we believe that the Afghanistan is we. We means that ethnic particular group, and that is why if you impose your own identity, your own language, your own intentions, your own customs, your own partial historical memory, your own ideals, your own icons, and also at the same time to eliminate all whatever existed in the past 1,000 years in Afghanistan, at least from the medieval period, it means it's an homogenization process, and that does not work in a a plural country like Afghanistan that we have, because we have seen in the previous history also some of the evidences and some of the half-tried attempts that in the history which did not work. So that is why I believe what nowadays going on in Afghanistan is kind of creating better memories in the mind of people to create more gaps, to create more holes and vacuums among the people. And what we are seeing nowadays, we have reached that phase of our devastation, that even the gaps, the identity issues, the apartheid issues are being institutionalizing in Afghanistan among the people. So what I told in the first part of my speak here, that at least during the 20 years, there was a top-down issues in Afghanistan among the elites, among the intellectuals. We had to talk about how to solve the issue in Afghanistan. That is why everyone was having his own perspective on how to define an approach to come out of the situation in Afghanistan. But nowadays, all these issues are, coming down among the people. So the ordinary people are also talking about all the issues which was once an academic issue or an elite issue, at least among the strategic community. That is why when a thing is institutionalized among the people, when an issue is also institutionalized among the people, then it would be too difficult to resolve it easily by homogenization or by taking for granted, or for example, ideological approach by sword to impose the people to accept a certain, barriers or certain identities.
So where do you think, well, he said, where do you think this will take the society or the people of the country? I mean, let's say next 5 years, 10 years, which this aggressive homogenization, what is the consequence of this, you think? Because the Taliban think they're going to build a country like this by hook or by crook. And you're saying that it's a failed global experience. So what do you think will happen?
We have both the scenarios, Shoaib. We have the worst case scenario. We have the better scenario if the world involves again. If the diaspora of Afghanistan plays a constructive role, than being fragmented and quasi-diasporic community that we have. So for the worst case scenario, I believe that the geopolitical games, the capacity inside Afghanistan, the potentials that they're all wasting nowadays can lead to a very fragmented Afghanistan once again that we have during 80s, during 90s in Afghanistan, which would be too difficult to revamp different portions of Afghanistan together as having a consensus or define a consensus on certain common ideals in the country. So if a country does not have defined ideals and it is fragmented in that way that we witnessed during 90s, it could lead to even elimination of a country like Afghanistan, unfortunately, from the geography, because we are leading towards that worst case scenario with the current situation. Otherwise, if there's a process for new social contract among the elites and intellectuals to talk about a homeland, a shared homeland, to live peacefully together, that can at least lead to a best case scenario for the future of the country.
Thank you, Balkis. A very grim and unfortunate reality and scenario that we might face. I'll come to you, Jean-Paul, and then I'm going to read out some of the questions for Steve and Sarwabiseb afterwards. Jean-Paul, I want to come back to you on the point of the ongoing engagement with the Taliban as de facto authorities. And I know, so the back and forth with Steve, I discussed this a little bit. Maybe, I mean, I know they say it, but maybe this is good enough recognition. As long as the money keeps flowing, as long as there's a level of engagement. Doha is now the political capital of Afghanistan. All the embassies engage with the Taliban in Doha because they don't have to be accountable to anybody. So in practice, this recognition has in a way almost happened in many ways. So do you Do you think this is, you know, a kind of a role model approach, and, you know, groups like Al-Shabaab and whomever, everybody has different ideologies. Even some can claim military coups. They don't really care for full-on recognition and a seat in the UN General Assembly per se, as long as there is a level of practical engagement. Do you think it has had that kind of effect? I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on this.
Thank you very much. First of all, as a peace-building organization, we believe in the theory that no one should be left behind. Even those are pointed out as evils, if they are part of the country, you need to find a way of engaging them, and genuinely for the sake of peace and stability. Unfortunately for Afghanistan, those that took power do not believe in that philosophy. But if the world needs really stability in Afghanistan, it is going to be difficult to build Afghanistan without Taliban. It's a fact now. And in the longer run, because they are the ones that are running the country, probably influencing them, trying by all means, even if my predecessor mentioned that they are not interested, I think it is Steve, they are not going to trade anything about their ideology. But using the stick only is not sufficient. We need to see where to compromise so that they see that there is a way of negotiation, so that their interests are not compromised. At the same time, the other million of Afghanistan that do not feel welcomed by the way they are doing things have a space. And because what Habiba say, the negotiation was run with a stick and a deadline. All of this I'm saying we should have been done before the negotiation, so that we have a middle ground. Now, as the situation is, it is, they are de facto the leader. We like it or not, it's a situation. We have to deal with them. It's the new norm. And I don't think there is someone that will have enough pressure than what the US has before on them militarily and political, and they managed to buy time. The strategy they use is patience. They are still using it even now. Terrorist organization, maybe to come back to respond to your question, they know if they buy enough time, the international community will not have choice to negotiate with them and accept it. Al-Shabaab played it. They are learning from Afghanistan to buy time so that their voice is heard. The terrorists in the Sahel knows that if they buy time, the international community will be obliged to put them on the table. So at the same time as they use patience, I think the international community, all the other actors need to buy time and have patience and try to use the stick, but also understand how to find the middle ground. That's the situation. Just to come back on Africa, Shoaib, if you are to choose between an elected leader in Niger, Niger has been having elections for the last 15 years, but people are extremely poor. They can see the huge presence of international community, military base that are there, but they see a certain elite getting more richer, and the people are more and more poor. So they are in a situation where they have nothing to lose. We better accept the military to see if we change the situation. For me, my own point of view, the situation is not going to be better because the military has taken over. It's because they don't have any other alternative. But again, in Niger, what is needed is state building, nation building. To see Niger is majority young. What do young people think? How can we give them a new social contract so that they accept a system that is generated with them, not against them. So it's not the new norm, but the way the international community has been dealing with the situation largely contributed to the situation, to the new norm. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. That sounds unfortunately very familiar. And some would argue that frustration with the Republic's government in Afghanistan also resulted in people not necessarily siding with the Taliban, but no longer defending and fighting for the government, which kind of catapulted the collapse the way it happened. Thank you very much for that, Jean-Paul. So I'm going to read out a few of the questions that the audience has shared. I will read the first two questions are somewhat similar, but I will address the first question to you, Sarabisib. Mark P. George asks, what is the state of coordination between the various Afghan players, NGOs, political structures, ethnic groups, civil society, refugee and women groups? Is there among them a beginning of a common situation analysis and common response to the Taliban agenda? Is there a desire to present a common platform representing the largest part of Afghan society today?
Thank you, Rahim Saib. Before coming to that question, let me to just comment on the previous question that you asked about if the result of the negotiation could be better. And I have to say that any peace talk without mediator cannot be a peace talk. So unfortunately, we didn't have any mediator during the peace talk. So of course, Qatari played the role of facilitator, but neither the government of Afghanistan and nor the Taliban, both of them didn't want any mediator. And that's why Taliban didn't want to regularly come to peace talk. At the end, the second round, government of Afghanistan agreed to have the mediator, but Taliban still didn't agree upon to that. And also we requested UNAMA to send or to to appoint a mediator, but the UNAMA process was too slow, and at the end even the mediator couldn't come. So the mediator for the result of the for the talks, it's very important. Okay, about this coordination among the NGOs, the activists, and diaspora, I'm sure that he's asking. There is one issue, which is many people and many organizations, NGOs, activists are coming, joining to that idea, which is the gender apartheid and the oppressive that women and the ethnic group are facing in Afghanistan today. So everybody agree in that one. So, but of course there are some other political, parties trying to coordinate, to harmonize their idea, but I'm not sure that it still need time to work on that. But the coordination among the civil society is much better than the others, but still we need time, we need more coordination, and of course, unfortunately, the civil society and diaspora is very, spread everywhere. So bring them together, it's a little bit difficult. So there are some steps taken in US among the women that they have to coordinate their activity. There are some steps they are taken in Europe that especially women group that to come together, but still we need more, effort to build a strong coordination among ourselves.
Thank you, Sarabi, for addressing both questions. I'd like to pose the next question to you, Steve, which is also along the same lines, which Munaza Ibtikar asks. I'll just read it out for everybody's sake. Thank you very much for this excellent panel. Given the current political crisis and in line with what colleagues have mentioned on the failure of nation building post-2001, my question is the inability of nation building effectively through non-military means why we see that Afghan officials, politicians who fled the country 2 years ago have not established a government in exile yet, or the majority have not formally or publicly joined the current resistance against the Taliban based in Tajikistan? We know that the republic was created on the backs of thousands of Afghans who were killed, serving and representing the state in the last 2 decades. Do Afghan officials of the republic currently living in exile support resurrecting aspects of the republic? What is their plan in creating political alternatives to the Taliban? You have more insight than most, so I feel very confident posing this question to you.
No, I think it's a very good question. And I think the answer is not enough is yet happening. At the moment, there are conversations obviously taking place around the world. As Dr. Sarabi just said, there's women's groups getting together in the United States. There's foundations in Germany trying to put together conversations. The European Institute of Peace, for whom I work, has had a couple of workshops with civil society activists and such like, including some based in Kabul. And the Afghan Institute for Strategic Studies held a meeting in London recently, which people attended. So I think there are various conversations taking place. I think there need to be more. The Austrians have had a couple of conferences with the National Resistance Front, if you like, up in Massoud and such like. So I think there are various conversations taking place, but I do think that it is important that people start to form consensus on, what they would like to see as a future Afghanistan. And I think we need a widespread of Afghan opinion on that, including people who are in Kabul but not Taliban, as much as it's safe for them to do so. And it shouldn't just be, the Dostums, Attas, and former warlords, if you like, but it should be ordinary Afghans who have a slightly different vision of how they would like to see the future of their country. And if they can get together, the Taliban still want to speak to some, of the people who they see as potentially having power. So you do need to include everybody at some stage, but it needs to be a big inclusive tent. And it needs to come up with, an agenda. You
don't have a good experience with tents, Steve. I'm not sure.
I know.
Don't work anymore.
The lawyer Jurga, I was there for the constitutional and the emergency and various ones. This is a lot of Afghans coming together for a long time to argue and talk about
maybe a proper building this time, with solid foundations. Tents are, the smallest storm will blow it away.
Yeah, but I do think people do need to have these conversations, and I'm pleased to see that they are. But the opposition, and I use the phrase loosely, will not be taken seriously by Western governments and such like if they can't even agree amongst themselves what their vision and their, how they would like to see Afghanistan progress. As Jean-Paul said, obviously the Taliban have to be part of that future of Afghanistan. They're the ones in power at the moment. But how you try and engage is difficult. The Taliban have invited various former figures back, but they're not prepared to have them go back as, representative of the new Supreme National Council for the Liberation of Afghanistan or the NRF. They're only prepared to take them back as individuals. They're trying to pick off people individually. They are worried about a united opposition. And so the sooner the opposition can get together and unite and come up with some sensible, proposals that don't involve, a reinvasion of Afghanistan by anybody, because it's not going to happen, as Khalilzad truthfully, correctly for once said, then, an alternative vision for how things could improve, with religion still being key, Taliban positions being key, but, people do need to get the act together.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I think it's also timely to point out that CDP-G, who's hosting this panel, is also, in addition to the examples you gave, runs a dialogue in Geneva and Turkey and plans to do so in Central Asia. I know that Dr. Arsene Mouradian is also among the audience today, and he's also hosted and plans to continue hosting events to bring people together. So there are initiatives, but I think more needs to be done, as you rightfully say. We have 2 more questions, which I will pose, and then we will start wrapping it up, and I will pass it to Timorise once we are done, hopefully in the next 10, 15 minutes maximum or so. The next question, Balkhiseb, which is directed to you, if you're still with us, is from Nasratullah Nabil. And he asks, we know the Taliban are doing homogenization, so what are the possible options in the hand of democratic forces of Afghanistan to respond to this wrong policy?
Well, thank you very much, and thanks, Nabil, for the question. I recently have written a paper talked about the role of the democratic forces and their participation for a possible solution to the problem in Afghanistan. And there I mentioned that, first of all, let me say that the diasporic community of Afghanistan mirrors Afghanistan. So that is why the gaps that we have among the intellectual and elites in Afghanistan, we have abroad also. That is why Steve was talking about, and I believe that that coordination was not possible in the past 2 years because of these gaps that we have outside also. But I believe that a shared responsibility for a shared homeland can bring us together to talk about our joint destiny for the future of the country. And that is to sit with each other to talk about a new social contract in Afghanistan. We have a geography, which is the only fact that we have and consensus among the people of Afghanistan, except that you do not have a consensus. If you're playing with words, which means you're somehow trying to divert yourself from the reality and talk and play with words as we have done in the past 20 years. So that is why I propose there to talk for a new social contract. We have to sit together, talk about the design of the status, the design of the governance, the identity of the country, the different approaches, different modalities for the market, for the people, for the young generation, for the health sector, for education. All these need to be discussed, gradually based on the experiences that we have, at least from our half successes and from failures. Especially, I think that the archive of the failures is too bulky nowadays when we talk about Afghanistan. At least we have something on the table, not to talk about it anymore, or not to take it as a priority anymore. So this way, I think there would be a trust building process, confidence building process among the elites and intellectuals of Afghanistan. Because nowadays the situation is as such that if you bring it to intellectuals, depending on different constituencies inside Afghanistan, they would not talk about a single Afghanistan which you talk about. So that is why that confidence building process is a very important solution for Afghanistan through a new social contract.
Thank you, Balkhiseb. So in line with your answer, there's a final question, which I think also which challenges, I think, the notion of nation building that you presented. And I'll read out the question by Nazifa Haqpal. Nation building and state building can always be contentious concepts, as interpretation and implementation of these concepts can be varied from one part of the country to another, and this is even applicable in the Western countries. My question is, don't you think it will be fair to say that the failure of state building or the failure of modernization is not linked to heterogeneity of ideas? Rather, had it not been the issue of proxy wars in the 70s and the new shifts amounting to the Doha deal, the state building and modernization would have succeeded. So, the question is that, if it weren't for the wars, this homogeneous approach would have worked. And perhaps she's implying that the Taliban's homogenous approach might work because there are no longer any proxy wars in a way. So if you could address her question.
I'll have a different responses what had both side things, because I personally believe the Taliban themselves are also the assets of a proxy geopolitical games in the country. But yes, another fact also we have to accept that the roots of the conflicts lies inside Afghanistan. I will talk about the realities of geopolitical games in Afghanistan, but for me it's secondary, because that is the nature of the international politics, which is aligned with the interventions always, because all the countries, all the states, either they talk always about the survival or kind of to extend the sphere of influence for their expansionist interest. But I always say that why there is no such type of negative intervention on Nepal, which is a small country with not a strong economy. Many other countries we have across the world that they are not that strong countries or that big countries or with major sources, but they are living peacefully because internally they have common ideas to have a consensus, and everyone has that commonality. That is why I believe that the current process which is going on in Afghanistan not only give a good response to the people, but also it makes more and more gaps to disconnect people from each other, to compartmentalize the people, and to devastate what I have always talked about, the fragmented Afghanistan, which is upcoming in the near future.
Thank you very much. Very, very engaging back and forth. I think somebody's raising their hand. Perhaps they haven't written the question in the Q&A box. I think I will just allow the person to share their question and speak their question. If you can be very short, and then after that we will wrap it up and pass it back to Timur Recep to end the session. So Mr. Omar, please go ahead. Yes, we can hear you, Mr. Omar.
You hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, it's great to see you, Shoaib Jan and Balkhi Sahib and Timuri Sahib and all others. I congratulate Timuri Sahib and other colleagues for organizing this important event. I just shortly will say that what we stack in these 2 years, we and other foreigners involved in Afghanistan, we are always talking about what happened, why we collapse. I just want to say one thing, that collapsing a regime or a party is very common in every country, but in Afghanistan is very strange because the whole parties, political parties has collapsed, and only one terrorist group could take over the government. Now, the question is that while we are very unique in the world, and I just saw 2 statements yesterday, there has been 40,000 and 30,000 evacuated by Germany and Canada. Most of them are these democratic people and people who believe in democracy and nations. They has been evacuated, and as during the speakers was raised that there is going on a competition between Democrats or Western countries and region for supporting Taliban and to try to use against each other. What is the future? What's next? Who can bring state? Who can build the states? Is it Democrats and the people, or is it Taliban that will have, unfortunately, another 100 years and ruling on the people? This is the main question. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that question. I'd like to pose that question to Sarabisib, if possible. And there's one final question which has been shared with me, and then that's we're gonna have to cut it off because the session will expire soon. So Sarabisib, could you speak to why Afghanistan is so unique that everybody except the militant group collapses, and the question that Omar Saib posed?
Okay, thank you, Omar Saib. I think Omar Saib himself, I'm sure that he knows why. I think, unfortunately, at least I have seen 5 collapse in my life. So because we already depend to the foreigner, to I mean, foreign country to come and to make the wrong state, I mean, right. So we do not want to bother ourselves to work in our country, or to mobilize the people, or our leaders always, I mean, watching, I mean, the foreign country to come to help them. From my point of view, this is unfortunate.
Thank you, Sarabisib.
And also, and also the geopolitical, I mean, situation in Afghanistan is a fact, but it mostly depends to us how we can build upon to our, I mean, people and nation.
Thank you for that response. I think, as Jean-Paul said in the beginning, I think that's a PhD question and maybe a few books to answer the question posed by Marcia. But thank you very much. The final question shared by Ms. Parwana Ibrahim Khail is to Balkhisib, and she asks about the effect of the Taliban curriculum, the new curriculum of the Taliban, in a recent report that came out in Hashd. So how dangerous do you think this curriculum is for the future of the country?
Thank you very much, Ibrahim Khail Saib. That's a great concern for me. I have raised always that the Taliban, they are looking legitimacy out of the school curriculum inside the future generation of Afghanistan, because they know that a pluralistic content or competency-based education would not give that legitimacy to a totalitarian regime in Afghanistan or in the future of Afghanistan. When I always talk about education situation in the country, I'm not only talking about the education bans on girls, but also the totality of education scenario in the country, because I believe nowadays the school infrastructures turned as a warehouse to collect some people and to deliver some of the hidden curriculum, verbal curriculum, and elimination of different humanitarian values, democratic values, civic studies from the current curriculum. I heard also that there are intentions of bringing reforms into the curriculum, but you know that it's a very professional and very technical procedure, which in Afghanistan we did not have the capacity. That is why we were investing some of the capacities inside Afghanistan to bring some reforms into the curriculum. That otherwise, if they want to bring or incorporate some of the ideologic content into the curriculum at the school level or university level, I'm afraid that after a few time, maybe after a few years, you will have a natural Taliban generation inside Afghanistan, who will institutionalize a Talibani modality of Islam, governance, and the living style. I think I'm completely agree with you that we have to be concerned, not only as even international community, because the mentality which comes out of the such curriculum in Afghanistan is not effective for Afghanistan and for the region. It will add to the insecurity, radicalization, and a burden generation to our region and internationally.
Thank you so much, Balkhi Saib. Thank you, all the esteemed panelists, Miraz Balkhi, Haiba Sarabi, Jean-Paul Mogheraniza, and Steve Brookings, for your time and your very, very high quality interventions. I learned a great deal. I hope the audience enjoyed the discussion. There were many questions and back and forth. And I'd like to thank again the Center for Dialogue and Progress Geneva for creating this opportunity to cover these very, very important topics. So that is it from my side. I'll hand it over back to you, Timoris.
Thank you, Rahim Saib. Thank you actually for facilitating this very interesting discussion. I think 2 years after the collapse of the Republic, it was a good analysis of where we stand in terms of peace building and the future of the country. Let me thank you, thank all the panelists who participated and provided their valuable comments and feedback in this webinar. And also thank the participants and those who posed questions to our panelists. I also thank my colleagues, all of them who contributed in organizing this webinar. The record of this event will be uploaded on our YouTube channel. And like I mentioned at the beginning, the report of the 2 webinars that we had a few months back is also available on the website of CDP-G and the LinkedIn page of CDP-G. And with this, I thank you again for your participation and wish you a very good time ahead on behalf of CDP-G. Thank you all.
Thank you very much indeed.